The deafening crack of her father's hand across her face echoed through the farmhouse, but Theresa Thornton refused to let a single tear fall. Blood trickled from her split lip as she stood defiant before her family, all gathered in their modest home on the outskirts of Dry Creek, Nevada in the summer of 1875. "You've brought nothing but shame to this family," her father, William Thornton, bellowed, his face red with fury. "First with your refusal to marry Pastor Jenkins, and now this found with that worthless drifter in the barn. No decent man will have you now." Theresa, 20 years old with copper hair that matched her fierce spirit, lifted her chin despite the stinging pain. "He wasn't worthless, and we were only talking. I've done nothing wrong." Her mother, Eleanor, sobbed quietly in the corner while her 3 younger siblings watched with wide eyes. The drought had devastated their farm for the 3rd season in a row, and debts were mounting. Her father had arranged her marriage to the wealthy, widowed Pastor Jenkins, a man 30 years her senior with wandering hands and cold eyes. "You'll fetch a price at least," her father muttered, not meeting her gaze. "The trading post owner said there are men looking for wives or housekeepers heading west. We can sell your contract and save the farm." "You can't sell me like cattle," Theresa gasped. But the decision had been made. 2 days later, Theresa found herself standing on a wooden platform behind the trading post, her few belongings in a small cloth bag at her feet, her hands bound loosely in front of her with rough twine not to prevent escape, but to signify her status as property being sold. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as men gathered, eyeing her with varying degrees of interest and impropriety. Some were filthy miners, others well-dressed businessmen with calculating eyes. Theresa kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to acknowledge any of them. 5 years of service from a healthy young woman, the trader called out. "Cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. Starting bid is $50. Bids began to rise, and Theresa's stomach twisted. A miner with rotting teeth offered $75. A saloon owner bid $80, eyeing her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. $100, came a deep voice from the back of the crowd. The bidders parted to reveal a tall figure. Dust covered his clothes from the trail, and a black Stetson was pulled low over his eyes. He stepped forward, and Theresa got her first good look at him. The stranger stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build. His face was weathered from the sun but handsome, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. His eyes were a striking blue, clear and direct as they assessed her. $100 from Mr. Oliver McCall, the trader announced. "Any higher offers?" The saloon owner hesitated, then shook his head. The miner had already slunk away. "Sold to Mr. McCall." The trader banged his gavel on a barrel. Oliver McCall approached the platform, his spurs jingling softly with each step. He paid the trader, who handed over a folded document, her labor contract. McCall tucked it inside his vest without looking at it. "Come along, miss," he said, his voice neither harsh nor particularly gentle. Theresa lifted her chin. "I won't be a whore." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something that might have been anger, not at her, she realized, but at the situation. "I need a housekeeper for my ranch," he said evenly. "Nothing more." He reached up and untied the twine around her wrists, letting it fall to the ground. Then he offered his hand to help her down from the platform. Theresa ignored his hand and climbed down herself, wincing as her feet hit the hard, packed earth. She was determined to maintain whatever dignity she had left. McCall didn't seem offended. He simply nodded toward a wagon parked at the edge of town. "It's a full day's journey to my place. We should get started." As they walked toward the wagon, Theresa stole glances at her new owner. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested strength without cruelty. Still, she'd learned not to trust men's appearances. "Your family," McCall said suddenly as he helped load her small bag into the wagon. "They were the ones who sold your contract." "Yes," Theresa answered stiffly. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Shame on them, not you." The unexpected words caught her off guard, and she looked up to find his blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Whatever you did or didn't do," he continued, "no father should sell his daughter." Before she could respond, he gestured for her to climb onto the wagon seat. "Let's go home." The word home sounded strange to Theresa's ears. She doubted wherever they were going would ever be home to her, but she had little choice but to follow. They rode in silence for the first hour, the wagon bouncing over the rutted trail that led away from Dry Creek. The Nevada landscape stretched out around them, a harsh but beautiful expanse of sagebrush and distant mountains. "You're awfully quiet," McCall observed eventually. "What would you have me say?" Theresa replied. "Should I thank you for buying me?" He gave her a sidelong glance. "I suppose not." Another mile passed before he spoke again. "I don't own you, Miss Thornton. I purchased your labor contract, but you're not property. The law says otherwise." "The law says I'm entitled to 5 years of housekeeping. It doesn't say I own your spirit." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Or your thoughts, which I can see are plenty spirited right now." Despite herself, Theresa felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "You don't know anything about me." "I know your name is Theresa Thornton. I know your family betrayed you, and I know you've got courage. It's there in your eyes even when you're scared." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not scared. Everyone gets scared sometimes, even me." His voice was matter-of-fact, without a hint of condescension. Theresa studied his profile. His nose had been broken once, she noticed, but it only added character to his face rather than detracting from it. His hands on the reins were strong but not rough, the hands of a man who worked hard but wasn't careless or cruel. "Why did you buy my contract?" she asked finally. "There must be plenty of women willing to be housekeepers without being purchased." "Not out here," he replied. "And not ones willing to stay. Most women who come west are already married or looking to be. Those who aren't," he shrugged, "well, they tend to find more profitable work in towns like Silver Creek or Las Vegas. So I was a bargain." Her voice was sharp. "You were someone who needed help," McCall corrected her. "I recognized that look in your eyes. I've worn it myself." That silenced her curiosity for a while. They continued riding as the sun climbed higher, the heat intensifying. McCall offered her water from a canteen and some jerky from his saddlebag. Theresa accepted both reluctantly, her hunger and thirst overcoming her pride. "My ranch is about 20 miles northeast of Las Vegas," he explained as they ate. "It's not the biggest spread, but it's good land with a reliable spring. I've got about 60 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, a vegetable garden that could use tending." "And you manage this all alone?" Theresa asked, finding it hard to believe. "I've got 2 ranch hands brothers named Jose and Miguel Vasquez. Good men. They have a small cabin on the property." He paused. "There's a proper house for you. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door." The implication was clear. He wanted her to know she'd be safe from him. Theresa wasn't sure whether to be relieved or suspicious of such consideration. "What happened to your last housekeeper?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face. "My mother. She died last winter, pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Theresa said automatically. McCall nodded in acknowledgement. "She was a good woman. Taught me respect for others, especially those who haven't been treated fairly by life." He glanced at her. "She would have been appalled to see you on that auction block." "As was I," Theresa replied dryly. That drew a short laugh from him, a pleasant sound that transformed his serious face momentarily. "You've got spirit, Miss Thornton. I admire that." The trail began to climb into rocky foothills, and McCall handled the wagon with practiced ease. As they rounded a bend, Theresa caught her breath at the view, a sweeping vista of valleys and ridges, the landscape painted in hues of amber and gold by the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," she said softly, forgetting for a moment to maintain her guard. "That it is," McCall agreed. "First time I saw this view, I knew this was where I wanted to build my life." "How long have you been here?" "Bought the land 5 years ago, right after the war. Came west with nothing but nightmares and a desire to find peace." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "You fought in the war," he nodded. "Union cavalry, saw things no man should see." Theresa had been a child during the Civil War, but she remembered the haunted eyes of returning soldiers, the way some men were never the same afterward. "Is that why you live so far from town?" she asked. "Partly," he admitted. "People are fine in small doses, but I prefer the quiet out here, just the land, the animals, and honest work." They fell into silence again, but it was more comfortable now. As the wagon crested another hill, McCall pointed to a valley below. "There it is. McCall Ranch." Theresa leaned forward to see better. The ranch was nestled in a protected valley with a creek running through it. The main house was larger than she expected, a solid 2-story structure built of timber and stone. A barn and several outbuildings were arranged nearby, with corrals for horses and cattle. Fields of grass stretched out on the valley floor, and she could see the glint of water in the distance. "It's impressive," she said honestly. McCall looked pleased. "It's taken a lot of work. Still plenty to do, but it's home." As they approached, Theresa noticed a smaller cabin set a short distance from the main house, smoke rising from its chimney. 2 men emerged at the sound of the wagon, waving in greeting. "The Vasquez brothers," McCall explained. "Jose is the older one with the beard. Miguel's the one built like a bull." Both men were dark-haired and brown-skinned, with friendly faces. They watched curiously as McCall halted the wagon in front of the main house. "Señor Oliver," called Jose, approaching. "You've returned with—" He stopped, noticing Theresa. "This is Miss Theresa Thornton," McCall said. "She'll be keeping house for us." The brothers exchanged a look that Theresa couldn't interpret, but they both tipped their hats respectfully. "Welcome, Señorita," Miguel said. "It will be good to have a woman's touch around here again." McCall climbed down from the wagon and came around to offer Theresa his hand. This time she accepted his help, her legs stiff from the long journey. "I'll show you the house," he said. "Jose, would you mind bringing in Miss Thornton's bag?" "Of course," Jose replied, retrieving her small cloth bundle. The main house was cool inside, a welcome relief from the heat. Theresa looked around at the large central room with its stone fireplace and sturdy furniture. It was clean but sparse, lacking the small touches that made a house feel lived in. "Kitchen's through there," McCall said, pointing. "Pantry's well stocked. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. Mine's at the end of the hall. There's a washroom off the kitchen with a pump and a copper tub." He showed her through the house efficiently, explaining where things were kept. The kitchen was larger than the one in her family home, with a good cookstove and ample workspace. Upstairs, her room was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the valley. "There's a key for the door," McCall said, pointing to where it hung on a nail. "As I said, your privacy will be respected." Theresa took the key, turning it over in her hand. "Thank you. I'll let you settle in," he said. "Supper's usually at sundown, nothing fancy, we're all easy to please with food." After he left, Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. This morning, she had awakened in her family home, despite its being a place of betrayal. Now she was miles away in a stranger's house, bound by a contract to serve him for 5 years. Yet McCall seemed different from what she had feared. His words, "Shame on them, not you," kept returning to her mind. No one had ever taken her side before. She unpacked her few possessions, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small Bible that had belonged to her grandmother, and a miniature portrait of her mother from happier days. The sum total of her life, fitting easily into one drawer. When she came downstairs later, she found McCall in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits. "You don't need to cook tonight," he said when he saw her. "You've had a long day." "I'm not fragile," she replied, moving to take the wooden spoon from him. "And if I'm to be your housekeeper, I might as well begin now." Their fingers brushed as she took the spoon, and Theresa was startled by the warmth that shot through her at the brief contact. McCall seemed unaffected, stepping back to give her space at the stove. "As you wish," he said. "I should check on the horses anyway." When he returned with Jose and Miguel, Theresa had set the table and improved upon the meal, adding herbs from jars she found in the pantry and making fresh cornbread to replace the hard biscuits. The men's appreciation was evident in their expressions as they sat down to eat. "Dios mío," Miguel said after his first bite. "This is wonderful, Señorita Thornton." "Just Theresa, please," she replied, uncomfortable with formality from men who were clearly essential to the ranch's operation. "Then you must call us Jose and Miguel," the older brother said with a smile. "We are like family here." McCall ate quietly, but Theresa noticed the way his eyes lingered on the food with satisfaction. "You're a fine cook," he said finally. "Better than I realized a meal could be." "My mother taught me," Theresa said, then fell silent, thinking of her mother's tears as she was taken away. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the property," McCall said, changing the subject as if sensing her discomfort. "You should know where everything is if you're to run the household." "I'd like that," she replied, surprising herself with her sincerity. That night, alone in her room, Theresa turned the key in the lock and leaned against the door, exhaling slowly. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, humiliation, and then the unexpected discovery that her new situation might not be as terrible as she had dreaded. Oliver McCall was an enigma, a man who bought a woman's contract, yet spoke of respect, and offered her privacy and dignity. Theresa wasn't foolish enough to trust him completely, but as she drifted off to sleep in the comfortable bed, she allowed herself a small hope that perhaps fate hadn't been entirely cruel. Dawn arrived with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Theresa woke disoriented before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite pretty, and pinned up her hair. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty but the fire already lit in the stove. Through the window, she could see McCall and the Vasquez brothers in the corral, working with the horses. The easy way they moved, the casual strength in McCall's shoulders as he tossed a saddle onto a chestnut gelding, it spoke of a life lived outdoors, in harmony with the land and animals. Theresa busied herself preparing breakfast: flapjacks, bacon, and coffee. The pantry was indeed well stocked with flour, sugar, coffee beans, and preserves. By the time the men came in, drawn by the smell of cooking, she had the table set and food waiting. "You're an early riser," McCall observed, washing his hands at the pump. "Farm life doesn't allow for sleeping in," she replied. "And neither does housekeeping, I imagine." The breakfast was consumed with appreciation, the men eating with the healthy appetite of those who worked hard physically. Afterward, Jose and Miguel returned to their duties while McCall offered to show Theresa the property as promised. "We can take horses," he suggested. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Theresa said. "Though it's been some time," he nodded. "I've got a gentle mare that would suit you." The mare was a dappled gray named Willow, with a soft eye and patient demeanor. Theresa stroked her nose, grateful for McCall's thoughtfulness in choosing a horse she could manage comfortably. Her father had never shown such consideration. They rode out together, McCall on his chestnut gelding, following the creek that ran through the property. He showed her the boundaries of his land, the best fishing spots, the vegetable garden that needed attention, and the small orchard of apple and pear trees his mother had planted. "The land provides most of what we need," he explained. "We only go to town for supplies once a month or so." "It's very self-sufficient," Theresa observed. "My father's farm was always struggling." "Good land makes the difference," McCall said. "And knowing how to work with nature instead of fighting it." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "There's a lookout point up there, best view in the county. Would you like to see it?" Theresa nodded, and they rode up a winding trail through pine trees until they reached a rocky outcropping. McCall dismounted and helped Theresa down, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. The view was indeed spectacular: mountains in the distance, the valley below, and the ranch buildings looking like toys from this height. The vastness of the landscape made Theresa's troubles seem smaller somehow. "I come here to think," McCall said, standing beside her. "Puts things in perspective." "It's beautiful," Theresa admitted. "I can see why you chose this place." McCall glanced at her, the sun highlighting the auburn in her hair. "What did you do to shame your family?" he asked suddenly. "If you don't mind my asking." Theresa stiffened, then sighed. He had a right to know what kind of woman he had brought into his home. "I refused to marry the man my father chose, Pastor Jenkins. He's wealthy and respected, but he's also cruel behind closed doors. I've seen how he treated his first wife." She swallowed hard. "Then I was caught speaking alone with a young man, a drifter passing through who'd been hired to help with harvest. Nothing improper happened, but my father didn't believe me. He said I was ruined and no decent man would have me now." McCall's expression darkened. "So he sold you rather than listen to the truth." "The farm is failing," Theresa said, finding herself making excuses for her family despite everything. "The money from my contract will help save it, help my younger siblings." "That doesn't make it right," McCall said firmly. "A father protects his daughter, he doesn't sell her to the highest bidder." Theresa looked away, fighting unexpected tears. "What's done is done." McCall fell silent, respecting her need to compose herself. After a moment, he said gently, "For what it's worth, I believe you. And your father was wrong about decent men. Any man worth his salt would be proud to have a woman of principle as his wife." The sincerity in his voice made Theresa look up at him, really seeing him in that moment not as her owner or employer, but as a man with his own story. The sunlight caught in his blue eyes, revealing flecks of gray, and the wind ruffled his dark hair where he had removed his hat. "Why did you really buy my contract, Mr. McCall?" she asked softly. He considered her question carefully. "I saw someone being treated unjustly. I was in a position to help." He paused. "And yes, I needed a housekeeper, but mostly." He looked out over the valley. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn, to be at the mercy of others. After the war, I was lost. If not for the kindness of strangers, I wouldn't be standing here today." There was more to his story, Theresa sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she said simply, "Thank you." He nodded, then gestured to the horses. "We should head back. There's work to be done." The days that followed established a rhythm to life on the McCall Ranch. Theresa rose early to prepare breakfast for the men before they headed out to work the cattle, mend fences, and tend to the endless tasks required to maintain the property. She cleaned the house, which hadn't seen a thorough cleaning since McCall's mother died, and began restoring the neglected vegetable garden. To her surprise, McCall worked alongside her in the evenings, helping to pull weeds and build up the soil. His knowledge of growing things was extensive, learned from his mother, he explained. She always said a ranch wasn't complete without a good garden, he told Theresa as they worked side by side one evening. Said the land gives back what you put into it. She sounds like a wise woman, Theresa replied, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. McCall smiled, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for pretense or cruelty. Over the weeks that followed, Theresa found herself settling into life at the ranch. The house began to feel less like a stranger's dwelling and more like a place she belonged. She added small touches, wildflowers in jars on the table, curtains she sewed from fabric McCall brought back from a supply run to Las Vegas, a braided rug for the sitting room floor made from scraps of old clothing. McCall noticed these changes with quiet approval. The place hasn't felt this much like a home since my mother was alive, he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I'm glad, Theresa said. A house should feel lived in. You've brought life back to it, he replied, his voice low and warm in the gathering dusk. Their eyes met briefly, and Theresa felt that same unexpected warmth she'd experienced when their hands touched that first night. She looked away quickly, confused by her own reaction. McCall was her employer, the owner of her contract. Whatever she might begin to feel for him was complicated by that fundamental inequality. Yet as summer gave way to autumn, Theresa couldn't deny that her feelings for Oliver McCall were deepening into something more than gratitude or respect. She found herself watching him when he wasn't aware the confident way he handled horses, his gentleness with a newborn calf, the rare smile that appeared when Jose told a particularly good story over dinner. For his part, McCall treated her with unfailing respect. He never entered her room, always knocked before entering the kitchen if she was working there alone, and consulted her about household decisions as if they were partners rather than master and servant. The only reminder of her status was the contract locked in his desk drawer, a document she had never seen but knew existed. One crisp October morning, McCall announced at breakfast that he needed to make a trip to Las Vegas for supplies. Would you like to come along? He asked Theresa. The ride might be pleasant, and you could choose fabric for new winter curtains. Theresa hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving nearly 4 months earlier. What if someone recognizes me? McCall's expression softened with understanding. Las Vegas is far enough from Dry Creek that it's unlikely. Besides, you've done nothing to be ashamed of. His consistent defense of her dignity never failed to touch her. All right, she agreed. I would like to see the town. They set out after breakfast, taking the wagon. The journey to Las Vegas took most of the morning, giving them time to talk. McCall told her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of his mother's determination to educate him despite his father's insistence that book learning was useless for a farmer's son. She taught me to read by candlelight after my father was asleep, he said with a smile. Said knowledge was freedom, and no one could take it from you once you had it. She was right, Theresa replied, thinking of her own love of reading, a passion her father had discouraged as impractical for a girl. Las Vegas proved to be a bustling town, with a main street lined with businesses and a constant stream of wagons and riders. Theresa felt momentarily overwhelmed by the noise and activity after months of ranch quiet, but McCall's steady presence beside her was reassuring. They visited the general store first, where McCall was greeted warmly by the proprietor, a round man named Franklin, who clearly considered him a valued customer. As McCall conducted his business, Theresa browsed the fabrics, selecting a warm green wool for winter curtains. "A fine choice," said a female voice beside her. Theresa turned to see a woman approximately her own age, well dressed in a fashionable burgundy traveling suit. "I'm Sophia Baker," the woman said, extending a gloved hand. "My husband owns the bank. You're new to town." "Theresa Thornton," she replied, shaking the offered hand. "I work at the McCall Ranch outside town." Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oliver McCall's place. I didn't realize he had hired help beyond those Mexican brothers." There was something in her tone that Theresa couldn't quite place, curiosity, perhaps, or something less innocent. Before she could respond, McCall appeared at her side. "Mrs. Baker," he said with a polite nod. "I see you've met Miss Thornton." "Indeed," Sophia replied, her eyes assessing them both. "How fortunate for you to have found household help, Mr. McCall, especially someone so." She paused deliberately. Young and attractive. The implication was clear, and Theresa felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. McCall's expression remained neutral, but she noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "Miss Thornton is an excellent housekeeper and a woman of impeccable character," he said evenly. "Las Vegas would benefit from more people of her quality." Mrs. Baker's smile turned brittle. "Of course." "Well, I must be going. My husband is expecting me." She nodded to them both and departed, her skirts swishing dramatically. "I apologize for that," McCall said quietly once she was gone. "Small towns breed gossip. She thinks I'm your—" Theresa couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "What Mrs. Baker thinks is of no consequence," McCall replied firmly. "We know the truth of our arrangement." They completed their purchases and had lunch at a small cafe before heading back to the ranch. The encounter with Mrs. Baker had cast a shadow over the outing, reminding Theresa of her ambiguous position in McCall's household. As they drove home, McCall seemed to sense her disquiet. "People will always talk," he said eventually. "The important thing is to live with integrity, regardless of what others might think." "Is that why you live so far from town?" she asked. He considered this. "Partly, though mostly it's because I prefer the company of honest animals to dishonest people." He glanced at her. "Present company excepted, of course." That drew a smile from her. "Am I an honest animal or an honest person?" "Definitely the latter," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Though you're as stubborn as any mule I've encountered." Theresa laughed, her mood lightening. "I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. McCall." "Oliver," he said suddenly. "When we're not in public, I wish you'd call me Oliver." The request surprised her. "Is that appropriate?" "I'm not sure what's appropriate about any of this," he admitted. "But it seems ridiculous to maintain such formality when we share a home and a table every day." Theresa nodded slowly. "Very well. Oliver." His name felt strange on her lips, but not unpleasant. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change that neither acknowledged but both felt. The first snow fell in late November, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland overnight. Theresa woke to find the world outside her window blanketed in white, the morning sun creating a dazzling display as it reflected off the crystalline landscape. She dressed warmly and hurried downstairs to start breakfast, knowing the men would need a hearty meal before facing the cold work ahead. To her surprise, Oliver was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove to a roaring blaze. "Good morning," he said, looking up at her entrance. "Thought I'd get things warmed up before you came down. It's bitter cold today." "Thank you," she replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That was kind of you." He shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just practical. Can't have our cook freezing." But there was warmth in his eyes that belied his casual words, a warmth that had been appearing more frequently of late when he looked at her. After breakfast, the men headed out to check on the cattle and ensure the stock tanks weren't frozen. Theresa busied herself with household chores, grateful for the snug house as the wind howled outside. By mid-afternoon, the storm had intensified, bringing more snow and driving winds that rattled the windows. Theresa was kneading bread dough when Oliver burst through the door, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air with him. His face was red from the cold, his hat and coat covered in snow. "Jose and Miguel are staying in their cabin tonight," he announced, stomping snow from his boots. "The cattle are secure in the lower pasture with windbreaks. It's turning into a real blizzard out there." Theresa helped him remove his snow-covered coat and hung it by the fire to dry. "Is everyone all right?" "Cold and tired, but fine," he assured her, warming his hands by the stove. "The brothers have plenty of firewood and food in their cabin. We just need to wait out the storm." As evening approached, the wind grew fiercer, howling around the eaves of the house like a living thing. Theresa prepared a simple but hearty stew for supper, and they ate in the kitchen rather than the dining room, drawn to the warmth of the cook stove. "Reminds me of winter nights during the war," Oliver said as they sat at the kitchen table afterward, reluctant to move away from the heat. The cold was sometimes worse than the fighting. Theresa had learned not to press when he mentioned the war, but tonight he seemed willing to talk. "Were you very young when you enlisted?" 19, he replied, his eyes distant with memory. "Thought I was a man already, found out quickly how wrong I was." "What happened?" she asked gently. Oliver was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames visible through the stove's grate. "Saw friends die, killed men I didn't know, watched as the country tore itself apart." He sighed heavily. "Lost my faith for a while in God and humanity in myself." "What brought it back?" Theresa asked, sensing there was more to his story. "An old Cherokee man," Oliver said, surprising her. "After the war, I wandered west, half dead inside. Ended up collapsed on the trail from exhaustion and fever. This old man, Joseph was his name, found me, took me to his cabin, nursed me back to health." He smiled faintly. "Said the Creator wasn't finished with me yet." "He saved your life," Theresa observed. "More than that," Oliver replied. "He taught me to see the world differently, to understand that the land isn't something to conquer but to live with in harmony. Stayed with him for nearly a year before I felt ready to make my own way again." He looked up at her. "That's when I decided to find a place like this somewhere I could build something good and clean after all the destruction I'd been part of." Theresa reached across the table impulsively and touched his hand. "You've succeeded. This ranch, what you've built here, it's something to be proud of." Oliver turned his hand over, his calloused palm against hers, and for a moment they sat connected by that simple touch, the howling storm forgotten. The blizzard continued through the night and into the next day. Confined to the house, Theresa and Oliver found themselves spending more time together than usual. They played checkers, with Theresa proving surprisingly skilled at the game. Oliver brought out books from his small library, volumes of poetry and adventure stories that they read aloud to each other by the fire. It was during one such reading, with Oliver's deep voice bringing to life the words of Tennyson, that Theresa realized how dramatically her feelings for him had changed since that first day. No longer did she see him as her owner or even merely her employer. He had become something else entirely, a man she respected, admired, and increasingly cared for deeply. The thought should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. Perhaps it was the isolation of the storm, creating an intimate world where only the two of them existed. Or perhaps it was the gradual trust that had built between them over the months. Whatever the reason, Theresa found herself watching Oliver's face as he read, noting the way his expression changed with the emotion of the poem, the strength in his profile illuminated by firelight. When he looked up and caught her watching him, she didn't look away. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had yet put into words. The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a transformed landscape of deep snow and ice-coated trees that glittered in the sunlight. Oliver and the Vasquez brothers spent the next several days checking on the cattle, breaking ice in the stock tanks, and ensuring the animals had access to food. Christmas approached, bringing a festive atmosphere to the ranch despite its isolation. Theresa decorated the house with pine boughs and red berries, and Oliver returned from a quick trip to Las Vegas with small gifts for everyone, including a length of beautiful blue silk for Theresa that must have cost a small fortune. "It reminded me of your eyes," he said simply when she protested that it was too extravagant on Christmas Eve. Jose and Miguel joined them for a special dinner. Theresa had prepared a feast, a roast goose with all the trimmings, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, and a rich plum pudding for dessert. They ate by candlelight in the dining room, which Theresa had decorated with extra care. After dinner, Miguel produced a guitar and played traditional Mexican Christmas songs, his rich voice filling the house with music. Jose sang along, and even Oliver joined in for the songs he knew. The evening was filled with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the tense, joyless Christmases Theresa had known in her father's house. As the night grew late, Jose and Miguel returned to their cabin, leaving Theresa and Oliver alone. They sat before the fire in the sitting room, content in each other's company. "Thank you," Oliver said suddenly. "For what?" "For making this the best Christmas I've had since my mother died." His voice was soft with emotion. "You've brought life back to this house, Theresa." The use of her given name, still rare enough to be notable, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "I'm glad," she said. "I've been happier here than I ever expected to be." Oliver reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I have one more gift for you," he said, handing it to her. Theresa unwrapped it carefully to find a small silver locket on a delicate chain. "Oliver, it's beautiful," she breathed, opening the locket to find it empty, waiting for treasured images. "My mother's," he explained. "She always said it should go to," he hesitated, "to someone special." Their eyes met, and Theresa saw in his gaze all the things he wasn't saying, his growing feelings for her, his uncertainty about the propriety of them, his hope that she might return them. "Would you help me put it on?" she asked softly. Oliver moved to sit beside her on the settee. Theresa turned, lifting her hair to expose her neck. His fingers were gentle as he fastened the clasp, but she could feel them trembling slightly. When she turned back to face him, they were closer than before. The firelight played across his features, softening them, highlighting the warmth in his blue eyes. Theresa found herself leaning toward him almost involuntarily. "Theresa," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want to take advantage." She silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "You're not," she whispered. "I know my own mind, Oliver." It was all the permission he needed. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Theresa leaned into his touch, her heart racing. When they finally separated, both breathless, Oliver rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he admitted. Never thought I'd feel this way again, or maybe for the first time if I'm honest. Nor did I, Theresa replied. Especially not when I was standing on that auction block. Oliver winced at the reminder, pulling back slightly. That's what concerns me. You're here because of a contract. How can I be sure your feelings aren't influenced by your situation? Theresa considered his words carefully, appreciating his concern even as she recognized its unnecessariness. Oliver, look at me, she said firmly. I may have come here through circumstances not of my choosing, but how I feel about you, that is entirely my choice. If anything, your ownership of my contract would give me reason to guard my heart against you, not open it. He searched her face, finding only sincerity. I want to tear up that contract, he said suddenly. I should have done it months ago. Then do it, she challenged, her pulse quickening. Without another word, Oliver rose and went to his desk in the corner of the room. He unlocked the drawer and withdrew a folded document, her labor contract. Returning to the fire, he held it up for her to see, then deliberately tore it in half, and then in quarters, before tossing the pieces into the flames. They watched together as the paper curled and blackened, then burst into bright flame before dissolving into ash. There, Oliver said, taking her hands in his. Now there's nothing between us but what we choose. And what do you choose, Oliver McCall? Theresa asked, her heart in her throat. You, he said simply. If you'll have me. Theresa's answer was another kiss, this one free from any shadows of the past. The winter passed in a blur of happiness for Theresa and Oliver. Though nothing improper occurred between them, Oliver was adamant about protecting her reputation and treating her with respect. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. They spoke of a future together, of marriage in the spring when travel would be easier, and they could ride to Las Vegas for a proper ceremony. Jose and Miguel observed the blossoming romance with approval, treating Theresa with the respect due to their boss's future wife. If they had ever harbored any doubts about the relationship that had begun with a purchased contract, those doubts were long dispelled by the obvious love between the couple. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared in late February, Oliver announced his intention to ride into Las Vegas to speak with the minister about their wedding plans. "Are you certain?" Theresa asked as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "People may talk. They'll remember how I came here." "Let them talk," Oliver replied, taking her hand. "We know the truth, and anyone who matters will see what's between us is real." Theresa leaned her head against his shoulder, content. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." "I thought perhaps April would be a good time for the wedding. The wildflowers will be blooming by then." "April sounds perfect," she agreed, imagining the ranch dressed in spring colors for their wedding day. Oliver left early the next morning, promising to return by nightfall. Theresa spent the day cleaning the house and preparing a special dinner to celebrate their official engagement. As dusk approached, however, there was no sign of Oliver on the trail from town. Trying not to worry, Theresa kept his dinner warm and waited, watching out the window as darkness fell. When the clock struck 9 with still no sign of him, she began to feel genuine concern. It wasn't like Oliver to be so late without sending word. Just as she was considering whether to ask Jose and Miguel to go looking for him, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her as she rushed to the door, but it wasn't Oliver who dismounted in the yard. It was a stranger, a young man wearing the dusty clothes of a traveler. "Madam," he called, seeing her in the doorway. "Are you Miss Thornton?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "Name's Charlie Winters, madam. I work at the Lazy S Ranch about 10 miles east of here." He twisted his hat in his hands nervously. "Mr. McCall asked me to bring you a message. He's been hurt thrown from his horse on the way back from town when the animal spooked at a rattler. Theresa's hand flew to her throat. Is he all right? Broke his leg bad, madam. My boss, Mr. Sanders, and his wife are looking after him at their place. The doctor from Las Vegas set the bone, but Mr. McCall won't be able to travel for some time. He asked me to tell you not to worry and to rely on Jose and Miguel until he can return. I'm coming with you, Theresa said immediately, already turning to gather what she would need. Give me 10 minutes to pack a bag and speak to the ranch hands. The young man looked uncomfortable. It's a rough ride, madam, and it's full dark now. Maybe better to wait till morning. 10 minutes, Theresa repeated firmly. I won't leave Oliver alone when he's hurt. True to her word, Theresa was ready quickly, having explained the situation to Jose and Miguel and left them instructions for managing the ranch. The ride to the Lazy S was long and difficult in the darkness, but Charlie proved to be a capable guide, leading them safely through the unfamiliar terrain. It was past midnight when they finally arrived. The main house of the Lazy S was larger than Oliver's, a sprawling one-story structure with a wide porch. A woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, opened the door at their approach. You must be Miss Thornton, she said, her expression unreadable. I'm Martha Sanders. Your Mr. McCall is resting now. The doctor gave him laudanum for the pain. Thank you for caring for him, Theresa said sincerely. May I see him? Mrs. Sanders hesitated, then nodded. This way, but he may not be conscious. She led Theresa to a back bedroom where Oliver lay on a bed, his right leg splinted and elevated on pillows. His face was pale, with lines of pain etched around his mouth even in sleep. Theresa's heart clenched at the sight of him so vulnerable. The break is bad, Mrs. Sanders said quietly. Dr. Peterson says it will heal, but it will take time and he'll need proper care. He should not be moved for at least a month. I'll stay and care for him, Theresa said without hesitation. That wouldn't be proper, Mrs. Sanders replied, her tone disapproving. An unmarried woman staying to nurse a man to whom she is not related, people would talk. Theresa lifted her chin. With all due respect, Mrs. Sanders, I don't care what people say. Oliver needs me and I won't leave him. The older woman studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. You really do love him, don't you? Yes, Theresa answered simply. With all my heart. Something in Mrs. Sanders' expression softened. Then stay. We have plenty of room and I could use the help around the house while you're here. My arthritis makes some tasks difficult these days. Thank you, Theresa said gratefully. I'm happy to help however I can. She pulled a chair close to Oliver's bedside, determined to be there when he woke. Mrs. Sanders left them alone, returning a few minutes later with a cup of hot tea for Theresa before retiring for the night. Theresa sat in the quiet room, listening to Oliver's steady breathing and occasionally wiping his brow with a cool cloth when he seemed restless. It was nearly dawn when his eyes finally opened, focusing on her with confusion that quickly turned to recognition. Theresa. He murmured, his voice rough with sleep and medication. You're here, how? Charlie brought me, she explained, taking his hand. Did you think I wouldn't come? A weak smile crossed his face. Hoped you would, didn't want to presume. Don't be foolish, she chided gently. Where else would I be but with you? Oliver squeezed her hand weakly. My leg is broken but will heal, she assured him. You need to rest and let me take care of you for a change. His eyes were already drooping with exhaustion and the lingering effects of the laudanum. Love you, he murmured as he drifted back to sleep. I love you too, Theresa whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. The next few weeks established a new routine. Theresa divided her time between nursing Oliver and helping Martha Sanders with household chores. Robert Sanders, a gruff but kind-hearted rancher in his 60s, assured her that Jose and Miguel were checking in regularly, and that the McCall Ranch was running smoothly in their absence. Oliver's recovery was slow and painful. The break had been severe, requiring the bone to be reset twice before the doctor was satisfied. Fever set in briefly, causing Theresa several nights of anxious vigil, but eventually his natural strength and her attentive care prevailed. As March gave way to April, Oliver began to improve more rapidly. He was able to sit up in bed, then to move to a chair by the window, and finally to attempt short walks using crutches the doctor had fashioned for him. Throughout it all, Theresa remained by his side, encouraging his progress and supporting him through moments of frustration. "You should be planning our wedding," he said one afternoon as they sat on the Sanders porch, enjoying the spring sunshine, "not playing nursemaid to a broken man." "You're not broken," Theresa replied firmly, "and there will be time enough for weddings when you're well. Besides," she added with a smile, "I rather enjoy having you dependent on me for a change. It balances the scales." Oliver laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as his health improved. "Is that how you see it? As a debt to be balanced?" "Of course not," she said, more seriously. "What's between us has nothing to do with debts or obligations. It never did, even when that contract still existed." Oliver took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I thank God every day for bringing you into my life, Theresa Thornton, even if the manner of your arrival was less than ideal. It led me to you," she said simply. "That makes it worth whatever came before." By late April, Oliver was strong enough to travel. The Sanders bid them a warm farewell, having come to respect and like the couple during their extended stay. Charlie rode with them back to the McCall Ranch, ensuring their safe return. Jose and Miguel welcomed them home with evident relief, and a house kept in perfect order during their absence. Theresa was touched by the care the brothers had taken. Even her garden had been tended, with early spring vegetables already sprouting in neat rows. As Oliver settled back into ranch life, albeit with limited mobility as his leg continued to heal, he and Theresa resumed their plans for the future. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Oliver broached a subject they had not discussed before. "I was thinking about children," he said, somewhat hesitantly. "Whether you might want them, a family." Theresa's heart warmed at the thought. "I would like that very much," she replied. "A house full of children with your blue eyes and stubborn chin." Oliver smiled, clearly relieved by her answer. "And your spirit and courage," he added. "Though perhaps not quite as much of your stubbornness. The world might not survive two of you." Theresa laughed and leaned against him, content in the moment and the promise of their future together. They were married on a perfect day in mid-May, 1876. The ceremony took place on the ranch, beneath a canopy of blooming wildflowers that Theresa and the Vasquez brothers had arranged. The minister from Las Vegas officiated, and the handful of guests included Robert and Martha Sanders, Dr. Peterson, and a few neighbors who had become friends. Theresa wore a dress of the blue silk Oliver had given her for Christmas, sewn by her own hands into a simple but elegant design. Oliver, standing tall with only the slightest limp to show his recent injury, watched her approach with such love in his eyes that Theresa felt her heart might burst with happiness. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with deep personal meaning. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Oliver gathered Theresa into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small celebration afterward was filled with good food, music from Miguel's guitar, and dancing, albeit careful dancing on Oliver's part. As the evening drew to a close and their guests departed, Husband and wife stood together on the porch of their home, arms around each other as they gazed at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy, Mrs. McCall?" Oliver asked, his breath warm against her hair. "Completely," Theresa replied, turning in his embrace to look up at him. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, kissing her softly. "More than I deserve." "Nonsense," she countered. "You deserve every happiness, Oliver McCall. And I intend to spend my life making sure you have it." He smiled, that rare, transformative smile that Theresa treasured. "As I will for you, my love. As I will for you." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, no longer employer and housekeeper. No longer bound by a contract, but partners in life, equals in love, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the western sky. Theresa McCall stood in the doorway of her home, watching her husband work with a young colt in the corral. 5 years had passed since their wedding day, and the ranch had prospered under their joint care. The house had expanded to accommodate their growing family, a sturdy 4-year-old son named James William, after both their fathers, though Oliver had insisted on using William as a middle name only, and 2-year-old daughter Elizabeth, who had her mother's copper hair and her father's blue eyes. The sound of children's laughter drew Theresa's attention back inside, where James was helping Miguel's wife, Lucia, prepare lunch. The Vasquez family had grown as well. Miguel had married Lucia 3 years ago, and they lived in an expanded cabin on the property with their infant son. Jose had moved to Las Vegas to open a saddle-making shop, but visited often. The McCall Ranch was now one of the most successful in the region. Oliver's innovative approaches to cattle breeding and sustainable land management had drawn attention from as far away as California. Their vegetable garden had expanded into a small farm operation that provided produce to Las Vegas merchants, managed primarily by Theresa with seasonal help. Life wasn't without challenges. There had been another harsh winter 2 years ago that claimed several cattle. A dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights had required legal intervention. And most painfully, they had lost a baby between James and Elizabeth, a stillborn daughter whose small grave lay beneath a cottonwood tree near the creek. But through it all, their love had only deepened. Oliver was a devoted father who spent hours teaching James to ride and telling Elizabeth stories on his knee. Theresa had found not only love but purpose, using her organizational skills to keep the ranch's books, and even starting a small school for the children of nearby ranches, teaching 3 days a week in a converted storeroom. As she watched Oliver finish with the colt and head toward the house, Theresa's hand drifted unconsciously to her belly, where a new life had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Oliver yet, waiting for the right moment to share the news of their 3rd child. "Mama." James called, running to the door. "Uncle Miguel says the pie is almost ready." "I'll be right there," she promised, ruffling his dark hair so like his father's. Oliver reached the porch, removing his hat as he stepped into the shade. At 35, he was more handsome than ever, the lines at the corners of his eyes speaking of both laughter and responsibility. "How's the training going?" Theresa asked as he leaned down to kiss her. "That colt's going to be a fine horse," he replied. "Stubborn, though. Reminds me of someone I know." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "I can't imagine who you mean," Theresa replied innocently, then laughed as he pulled her into his arms. Over lunch with the extended family that the ranch had become, Theresa watched Oliver with their children and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. From that terrible day on the auction block to this moment of domestic happiness, it was a journey she could never have imagined. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Theresa and Oliver sat on the porch swing he had built for their 3rd anniversary. The spring air was cool but pleasant, fragrant with blooming wildflowers. "I had a letter from Las Vegas today," Oliver said, his arm around her shoulders. "Pastor Bennett is organizing relief for families affected by that fire last month. Asked if we might contribute." "Of course we will," Theresa replied. "What do they need most?" "Food, blankets, building supplies," Oliver listed. "I thought we might send a wagon next week." Theresa nodded, then turned slightly to look at him. "I have some news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need to make the nursery ready again." Oliver's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Truly," he whispered. "Truly," she confirmed, smiling as joy spread across his face. "Dr. Peterson confirmed it yesterday when he was here checking on Miguel's boy." Oliver gathered her close, his hand still protectively covering her stomach. "Another child," he murmured against her hair. "Another blessing." "Are you happy?" Theresa asked, though she already knew the answer. "Beyond words," he replied. "Every day with you is a gift, Theresa. Each child, each moment, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. "I've been thinking," Oliver said eventually, "about your family in Dry Creek." Theresa tensed slightly. She rarely thought of her parents and siblings anymore, having received no word from them since the day she was sold. "What about them? I wonder if they know how happy you are, how well you've done, if they regret what they did." Theresa considered this. "I don't know. Perhaps they believe they did what was necessary to save the farm." "Would you want to find out? We could ride to Dry Creek someday, show them the life we've built." The suggestion surprised her. "Why would you want that after what they did?" Oliver was quiet for a moment. "Not for their sake, but for yours. To show them that their shame is not yours, that you've created a life of value and meaning despite their betrayal." He paused. "Or perhaps to give them a chance at redemption if they're capable of it." Theresa leaned against him, considering his words. "Perhaps someday," she said finally. "But not now. My family is here, you are children, this ranch. The past is behind us." Oliver nodded, understanding. "Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'll support you." "I know you will," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "That's why I love you, Oliver McCall. You've always seen me clearly from that very first day." "Shame on them, not you." He quoted his own words from that fateful day, now a cherished part of their shared story. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are the bravest, strongest, most loving person I've ever known." "And you," Theresa said softly, "are the man who saved me, not by buying my contract, but by believing in me when no one else did." As the stars appeared one by one in the vast Nevada sky, Oliver McCall held his wife close, grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought her to that auction block 5 years ago. What had begun in shame and betrayal had transformed into a love story. Neither could have imagined a testament to the healing power of respect, kindness, and unwavering devotion. And as the years passed, the McCall Ranch continued to thrive, becoming known throughout the territory not only for its fine cattle and sustainable practices, but for the family at its heart, a family built on love, respect, and the unshakable belief that every person deserved to be valued for who they truly were. Oliver and Theresa McCall raised their children to understand this fundamental truth. James grew into a thoughtful young man who eventually took over management of the ranch, implementing his father's vision while adding innovations of his own. Elizabeth became a teacher like her mother, eventually founding a proper school in Las Vegas. Their third child, a son they named Joseph after the Cherokee man who had saved Oliver's life, grew up to become a doctor, bringing medical care to remote ranching communities. And on quiet evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Oliver and Theresa still sat together on their porch swing, hands clasped, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors. Their love story, begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, had become a legend in the territory, a reminder that even in the wild, untamed West, the human heart's capacity for love and redemption knew no bounds.